based on Morgan Housel's bestseller, right? And it basically argues that getting good with money, it's really not about how smart you are. It's much more about how you behave. And honestly, that's often way harder to get right. Okay, let's jump into the big takeaways you gotta know. First, forget IQ scores. Seriously. Your financial success, it really hinges on your temperament, your patience. I mean, look at Ronald Reed, a janitor, right? He died with over $8 million just by saving consistently and putting money into solid blue chip stocks for decades. Then you've got this genius tech exec who literally threw gold coins into the ocean and went broke. Kind of proves patience beats brain sometimes, yeah? Second big idea, compounding. Where your money starts making money on itself. The real magic there isn't about crazy high returns, it's about time. Longevity is key. Get this, Warren Buffett, like $84.2 billion of his $84.5 billion net worth showed up after his 50th birthday. Almost all of it. It's about good returns for the longest possible time. And finally, remember this, real wealth is often invisible. Being rich might mean a big paycheck now, but actual wealth, that's the money you don't spend. It's hidden assets. And what that really buys you is independence, control over your time. Honestly, doing what you want, when you want, that's the best thing money can give you. So focus on your behavior, stay in the game long enough, and let time do its powerful work for you.
Processing companies can fund their growth using the cash accounts receivable factoring can provide. Contact Chris at Versant Funding to learn if your client is a factoring fit.
We're stepping away from the spreadsheets, the formulas of finance, and diving headfirst into the messy human side of money.
Exactly. Our sources make this one powerful claim right up front. Doing well with money. It has surprisingly little to do with how smart you are. It's much, much more about how you behave.
That's the core idea, isn't it? Finance is usually taught like it's all math formulas, optimization, correlations.
Right, like a hard science. But those technical skills, they tell you almost nothing about what actually happens, in your head when the market goes crazy or when you feel that temptation to show off a bit.
So we're here to unpack those counterintuitive lessons, the ones about wealth, happiness, risk, the things that really drive outcomes for you in the long run.
And to really hammer this home, this behavioral idea, we've got one of the most, unbelievable case studies I've come across in finance. It's quite the contrast.
Okay, lay it on us. On one side, you've got this super successful tech executive, a genius apparently, designed and patented a key part for Wi-Fi routers. Made a lot of money, super successful by most measures, but financially, a total disaster.
A disaster really defined by insecurity, it seems. This guy carried around a thick brick of cash, constantly bragging about how rich he was. And get this, on one occasion, he bought several gold coins, like $1,000 gold coins.
Just to do what with them?
Just to throw them into the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
Like skipping stones. Said it was just for fun.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And predictably.
Yeah. He later went completely broke.
Okay. Now, contrast that guy with Ronald James Reed. His story has, zero secret inheritances or big startup wins.
Not at all. He was a janitor, a gas station attendant, first person in his family to even finish high school.
Lived really simply, apparently.
Yeah.
In a $12,000 house, fixed cars, swept floors. Pretty ordinary life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. He saved what little he could. And he consistently invested it in solid, established companies, blue chip stocks.
Right.
And then it just waited for decades.
Okay. So what happened?
Well, when he died back in 2014 at age 92, his net worth was over $8 million.
$8 million from a janitor's savings.
$8 million. And he left a huge chunk of it, like $6 million, to his local hospital and library.
That says it all, doesn't it? The Harvard-educated genius loses everything because he can't control his ego, versus the ordinary janitor who ends up building massive wealth, becomes a philanthropist just by having a few key behavioral skills.
Exactly. Patience, discipline. It proves, I think, that financial success is really a soft skill.
Yeah, you'd never expect a janitor to outperform a brain surgeon in the operating room.
Right. Impossible.
Yeah.
But in investing,
Yeah.
that kind of thing happens more often than you'd think. Outcomes are driven more by how you act than what you know on paper.
Okay, so let's dig into this behavior thing. Starting with perspective. Our sources argue this point. No one's crazy.
Honestly, I find that a little hard to swallow sometimes, looking at some of the, let's say, clearly irrational financial choices people make. How do we justify those bad choices?
Well, maybe justify isn't the right word. It's more about understanding every decision someone makes about money. It feels rational to them when you see it through the lens of their unique life experiences. We're all sort of anchored to views about money shaped by our specific history. What inflation was like when we grew up, our parents' financial struggles, the job market when we started out.
Right. So what looks completely bonkers to you might make perfect sense to me just because we effectively grew up in different financial worlds.
Exactly. Think about it. If you were born in, say, the 1960s, you saw prices basically triple during your teens and 20s. That experience deeply shapes how you think about debt, risk, bonds. Yeah, versus someone born in, like, 1990 who grew up with pretty stable prices. Inflation wasn't really a big, scary thing for them in the same way. Very different anchor points.
And this experience gap helps explain things that seem odd, like the lottery paradox.
Okay, what's that?
Well, you look at the data. High-income folks, they almost never buy lottery tickets. But the lowest income groups spend, on average, like 4 times as much on them.
Right. And from the outside, you might think, that's crazy. They're blowing money they need, maybe their safety net, on this tiny, tiny chance.
But then you step back. You learn that something like 40% of Americans can't easily come up with $400 for an emergency. So for someone really struggling buying that lottery ticket, maybe it's the only visible way they see to possibly, hit it big, to change everything overnight.
So in their context, it's not just gambling, it's buying hope, a shot at freedom.
It could be. That purchase represents something different to them than it does to someone financially comfortable. So is it rational? Maybe, within their constrained options and perspective.
It really drives home how limited our own viewpoint is. Your personal experiences are what, like 0.0000001% of everything that's ever happened financially.
And yet they probably anchor about 80% of how you think the whole financial world works. It's humbling, really. We have to remember that when we judge others' choices, or even our own.
Okay, so if our individual perspectives are so different, so varied, how do we find some common ground? Maybe in something more objective, like math. Let's talk about time. And compounding. What's the biggest, maybe most counterintuitive mathematical force we need to understand in finance?
Oh, it's compounding, hands down. Because the way it grows, it's just not linear. It's not intuitive at all. The sources use this great ice age analogy. Think about how an ice age starts. It's not some sudden, dramatic deep freeze.
Right, it's slow. Almost imperceptible at first.
Exactly. It starts with tiny shifts in conditions, like maybe just a little bit less snow melts during the summer than fell the previous winter. Just a tiny bit, year after year. That tiny initial difference, that slight imbalance, it compounds. Over centuries, millennia, boom, ice sheets cover continents. It's not about the initial amount, it's the endurance of that small change over vast time.
And applying that to investing, that endurance, that time in the market, it's like the ultimate superpower. We always talk about Warren Buffett's skill, his investment genius. But here's the statistic that just blows my mind. $84.2 billion of his net worth came after his 50th birthday.
$84.2 billion. After 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the key. His real edge wasn't necessarily getting the absolute highest percentage return each year. It was being a phenomenal investor for like 3/4 of a century, 75 years.
Just staying in the game that long.
Compare him to Jim Simons, founder of Renaissance Technologies, the quant fund. This guy compounded money at an absolute staggering 66% per year. That's 3 times Buffett's already amazing 22% average.
Okay, so Simons must be way richer then.
Nope. He's worth about 75% less than Buffett.
How is that even possible with returns like that?
Time. Simons didn't really find his massive investing success, his stride, until he was 50 years old. He just had less than half the number of years for that incredible compounding to work its magic.
Wow. So it really drives home the point. Good investing isn't necessarily about squeezing out the absolute highest returns every single year, which is hard to do consistently anyway.
Exactly. It's more about earning, pretty good returns that you can actually stick with psychologically and strategically, and returns that could be repeated for the longest possible period of time. That's where the real wealth is built.
And sticking with it means, well, it means you have to survive, right? You can't just be good at getting wealthy. You have to be just as good, maybe even better, at staying wealthy.
That is probably the most crucial distinction. There's this story about Rick Guerin. He was a contemporary of Buffett and Charlie Munger, one of their early partners, really. Just as smart, just as skilled at picking investments, at getting rich initially.
Okay, so what happened to him?
Well, as Munger apparently put it, Rick was always in a hurry.
In a hurry, meaning he took on too much risk.
Yeah, specifically leverage. He used margin loans, basically borrowing money against his existing stocks to buy even more stocks, trying to juice his returns get rich faster.
Uh-oh. I can see where this is going. That works great in a rising market, but...
But then the brutal 1973-1974 market crash hit, stocks plunged. And because Guerin was leveraged, he got margin calls. The brokers demanded more cash to cover the loans against his falling stocks. He didn't have it. He was forced to sell his Berkshire Hathaway stock, the same stock that made Buffett a billionaire for less than $40 a share. Just wiped out.
Wow, same skill at getting rich, but failed the survival test.
Exactly. He wasn't good at staying wealthy, which means the core goal shouldn't just be maximizing returns. It needs to be about becoming financially unbreakable.
Right, which means building in room for error, even if that means doing things that feel suboptimal sometimes, like holding cash, even when the market's roaring.
That cash, yeah, the stuff maybe earning 1% or whatever, it feels like it's dragging down your returns during a bull market, it kind of gnaws at you. But its real return, the hidden return, is the option value it gives you. It's the ability to avoid being forced into a desperate panic sale the worst possible time, like Guerin was.
It lets you survive the inevitable chaos.
Survival is the prerequisite. It's the only way compounding gets the decades it needs to perform those miracles.
Okay, so let's assume we manage to survive. We stick with it, we let compounding work. What's the ultimate point? What's the real payoff? What's the highest dividend money actually pays?
Freedom. Control. Simple as that, according to the sources. The highest form of wealth isn't a bigger house or a faster car. It's the ability to wake up in the morning and say, genuinely, I can do whatever I want today.
Control over your own time.
Yes, and the research apparently backs this up pretty strongly. Having control over your time is a much more dependable predictor of happiness than your salary, the size of your house, even how prestigious your job title is.
Yeah, that resonates. I mean, you can have a really interesting, intellectually stimulating job. But if you have zero control over your schedule, your time, it can still feel miserable.
Absolutely. There's this psychological concept called reactance. It's that feeling we get when rules or constraints feel like they're forcing us, taking away our autonomy. Think about, say, a high-paying job like investment banking. The work might be challenging, engaging, but if you feel like you have to respond to every email at 2 a.m., then you have no control. That reactance kicks in.
And it makes the work feel oppressive, doesn't matter how big the paycheck is.
Right. That lack of control negates a lot of the benefits.
And this desire for control, or maybe the appearance of control or status, it often gets channeled incorrectly, doesn't it, into buying visible things, which leads us right into the man in the car paradox.
Yes. This one's subtle, but so true. When you see someone driving a really expensive, flashy car.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, be honest. You rarely think, wow, that person driving must be so cool and successful.
Okay. Yeah. Mostly, I think.
Mostly you think, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. Guilty. You imagine yourself in the car receiving the admiration.
Exactly. The admiration you're imagining is directed at you, hypothetically owning the car. The actual driver, the person who spent the money, they're almost invisible in that equation. They're just bypassed.
That's kind of painful when you think about it. You buy the thing hoping for respect or admiration, but the object itself just deflects that attention back onto the observer's own desires.
It's a futile pursuit if respect is the real goal. You'll likely get far more respect from humility, kindness, empathy, actual human qualities, than you ever will from horsepower or brand names.
Which brings us neatly to this fundamental distinction the sources make, the difference between being rich and being wealthy.
Right. And the key is, wealth is what you don't see.
Explain that. Rich seems pretty visible.
Rich is visible. Rich is the high current income. It's the $100,000 car parked in the driveway, the big house, the expensive watches. It's spending. Wealth. Wealth is hidden. It's the income that wasn't spent. It's the financial assets, stocks, bonds, savings that haven't yet been converted into visible stuff.
So when you see that person driving the $100,000 car,
all you know for sure is that they now have $100,000 less wealth than they did right before they bought it. Or perhaps $100,000 more debt.
That's it. You see the consumption, not the balance sheet.
And because wealth is hidden, it's incredibly hard to learn about or emulate. We don't see the restraint. We don't see the savings. Think back to Ronald Reed, the janitor. He only became famous, lionized after he died, and his hidden wealth was revealed in his will. During his life, he was invisible from a wealth perspective.
So we end up looking up to the rich people, the ones visibly spending, which is literally the opposite behavior required to actually build wealth.
Exactly. It's a trap.
Yeah.
Building wealth relies fundamentally on saving. And saving, at its core, is simply the gap between your ego and your income.
The less you need to spend to impress others or satisfy immediate desires, the more you can save.
And that act of saving, building that gap, is far more controllable and effective for building wealth than trying to chase the highest possible investment returns, which are always shrouded in uncertainty. Your savings rate is largely up to you. Investment returns aren't.
And crucially, you don't even necessarily need a specific concrete goal for all of that saving, do you?
Not at all. That's a really powerful idea. Saving money just for saving's sake, without a defined spending goal attached to every dollar, that creates the ultimate buffer. It's a hedge against life's inevitable surprises, the unexpected job loss, the opportunity that requires capital, the furnace breaking.
It gives you options, flexibility.
Flexibility, the ability to wait for the right moment, freedom from worry. These are incredibly valuable things. The return on that kind of saving is almost incalculable. It's peace of mind.
Okay, this has been fascinating. As we start to wrap up, let's try to distill these ideas. What are, say, 4 final, really actionable takeaways for you listening?
Okay, 4 key things. First, aim to be reasonable, not purely rational.
What's the difference in this context?
Rational might look like chasing the absolute maximum return shown on a spreadsheet, even if it involves a strategy that makes you lose sleep. Reasonable means choosing a strategy that's good enough, one you can actually stick with comfortably for the long haul. Because remember, endurance is what makes compounding work its magic. A reasonable strategy you follow for 50 years will beat a perfect, rational one you abandon in panic after 5 years every single time.
Stickability over theoretical perfection.
Got it.
Okay, second takeaway.
You have to recognize and accept the price of admission.
The price of admission for good returns.
Exactly. Good long-term investment returns aren't free. They demand a price. And that price is dealing with volatility, fear, doubt, uncertainty, regret, all that uncomfortable stuff. The key is to view market downturns and uncertainty not as a fine like a penalty you pay for doing something wrong. See it as a fee. It's just the unavoidable cost you pay to get access to the potential for higher long-term returns than safer assets offer.
You have to be willing to pay the fee to get the product. Makes sense. Third.
Worship room for error. Build in a margin of safety.
Okay, plan for things to go wrong.
Yes, but it's more than just planning for the risks you can anticipate. The most important part of any plan is planning on the plan not going according to plan in ways you can't anticipate. You need that buffer, that margin of safety, not just for the known risks, but for the field mice, the totally unexpected, maybe even crazy-sounding things that could derail you. Things too small or weird to make it into the official forecast.
Room for error gives you endurance, financial and emotional.
Right. And the final takeaway.
Avoid the extremes.
Extremes in what sense?
Extremes in financial planning and life choices. We humans are notoriously bad at predicting how much will change in the future. Our goals, our desires, our tolerance for things. Psychologists call it the end of history illusion. So if you make really extreme financial decisions today, like vowing to live on almost nothing forever, or committing to working insane hours for decades to maximize income, you dramatically increase the odds of regretting it later when you inevitably change.
So balance is key.
Balance is the strategy to minimize future regret. It keeps your options open as you evolve. Okay, so pulling it all together, what's the final provocative thought for someone trying to navigate this complex financial world today?
Well, I think it comes back to the beginning. The biggest driver of your financial outcomes isn't your IQ, it's not your education, it's not even necessarily the market's performance. It's the stories you tell yourself. It's the preferences you have. It's your behavior.
And in a world where, things like AI and global competition are making pure intelligence less of a unique advantage.
Exactly. And intelligence is becoming more commoditized. So if you really want to stand out, if you want to build lasting security and well-being, the most valuable currencies you can acquire today are probably flexibility and genuine control over your time.
Focus your efforts there. That's where the real leverage is.
I think so. That's what the psychology of money seeks to teach us.
Software companies can fund their growth with accounts receivable factoring. Contact Chris at Versant Funding to learn if your software client is a factoring fit.
We're looking beyond just the spreadsheets and, the complex models. We want to dive into a more fundamental question. What truly dictates wealth? Is it the stuff we can control, our personal behavior? Or are the outcomes, especially the really big ones, overwhelmingly determined by things like luck and other external forces?
Exactly. And the central disagreement we're exploring is this. Does financial success mainly come from those internal, controllable soft skills, Patience, humility, the discipline to save consistently?
Right.
Or is the magnitude, the sheer scale of wealth, fundamentally dictated by external, uncontrollable forces? Things like how long you have for compounding to work, the systemic context you're born into, and, well, just pure chance.
And I'll be taking the position that these behavioral soft skills, they're the most powerful and frankly the most reliable drivers for good long-term financial outcomes.
And I'll be coming at it from the position that argues, well, yes, good behavior is certainly necessary. It keeps you in the game, so to speak. But these external factors, they ultimately dictate the scale of success. Things like structural economic changes, risk, randomness, these are the multipliers. They can turn small, steady efforts into spectacular fortunes. Or, the flip side is they can turn brilliant, high-effort work into, well, utter ruin. We really have to respect the power of things we just can't control.
Okay, well, my position is really rooted in a simple observation. Financial results seem determined far more by how you navigate the world, your behavior, than by, say, raw intelligence or technical know-how. The material gives us these perfect, really stark human case studies. Think about Ronald Reed, a small-town janitor, right? Who managed to accumulate over $8 million. His strategy wasn't complex at all. It was save consistently, invest in pretty predictable blue-chip stocks, and just exercise extreme patience for decades. His success needed like zero formal financial training.
Okay.
Now you contrast him with Richard Fuscode, Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive, a guy who, seemingly had every technical advantage, every connection, probably buckets of raw intelligence. And yet, he went bankrupt in the 2008 crisis. Why? Because he relied on high debt and illiquid assets. I mean, this tells us pretty much everything we need to know, doesn't it? A genius who loses control of their ego, their appetite for risk, they can be a total financial disaster.
Yeah.
While a humble, disciplined person can actually achieve extraordinary results. So the core skill here, I think, is longevity. It's the ability to stay wealthy, which is fundamentally a behavioral commitment. It requires frugality and maybe a healthy dose of paranoia, not just the skills needed for getting wealthy. Look at Warren Buffett. The vast majority of his, $81.5 billion fortune? It was accumulated after he qualified for Social Security. Endurance, driven by behavior, seems to be the primary compounding factor, not just sheer brilliance.
That's a powerful point about endurance. I won't deny that. But I think framing it that way actually undersells the external forces that are necessary for that endurance to even pay off in such a big way. Longevity is necessary, sure, I agree, but it's absolutely not sufficient for the staggering scale of wealth you're describing with Buffett. The sheer size of that kind of extraordinary success is often dependent on very specific, uncontrollable events. Luck, risk, and crucially, time.
Let's look at Bill Gates. We rightly celebrate his vision and his drive, of course, but we have to acknowledge the 1 in a million luck, right? Attending one of the very few high schools in the entire world back in the 1960s that had a working computer terminal. I mean, that luck was foundational to Microsoft's creation.
Okay, fair. And you see the flip side of that same coin with his childhood friend Kent Evans, had the exact same drive, apparently the same technical skill, but died in a freak mountaineering accident before Microsoft really took off. Luck and risk, as the source material suggests, they're like siblings. One determines if you even get a head start, the other determines if you survive long enough to actually use it.
Right. In regarding Buffett, in time, that's perhaps the most powerful external force of them all. The difference between Buffett, a 22% annual return over 70 years, and Jim Simons, who achieved a staggering 66% annual return since 1988, it's really instructive. Simons, mathematically, is clearly a far superior investor, no question. Yet he's 75% less wealthy than Buffett. Why? Simply because he started compounding much later, he had less than half as many years in the game. That time horizon, that's a structural reality. It's not a behavioral trait. And that's what generates those truly ridiculous, almost impractical numbers.
Okay, I accept that time is, a structural constraint, yes? But the ability to actually utilize that time, the longevity that you yourself acknowledge, that's the direct result of a whole series of active behavioral choices. When you talk about avoiding ruin, What we're really discussing is the behavioral priority of being, let's say, financially unbreakable, and consciously embracing what the material calls room for error.
Okay.
Survival is the prerequisite for compounding, and survival is a discipline. Think about Rick Guerin. He was arguably just as smart as Buffett and Munger, but he was, as the story goes, in a hurry. He leveraged his portfolio using margin loans. So what happened? When the market crashed hard in 73-74, that leverage, that behavioral choice, forced him to sell his Berkshire Hathaway stock right at the absolute bottom just to meet margin calls. He was smart, sure, but behaviorally fragile. The choice to hold cash, for example, even if it earns close to 0%, that's a behavioral decision, and it prevents that kind of desperate, ill-timed sale during a moment of panic. That prevention, that avoidance of forced error often does more for your lifetime returns than picking a dozen huge winners. Endurance, really, is just avoiding those forced errors.
That's a compelling point about forced error, definitely. But I guess I challenge the idea that you can behaviorally plan your way around every form of destruction. You can certainly plan to survive a normal recession, maybe even a bad one. But what about the kind of destruction that's truly, fundamentally unforeseeable? Longevity, your endurance? It only really works if the macroeconomic context itself is resilient, right? I mean, over the last 170 years or so, the U.S. economy survived, 9 major wars, 33 recessions? The behavior of one individual janitor saving his money is kind of meaningless unless the whole system itself survives.
Okay.
And the truly massive returns, the spectacular scale we're talking about, they often come from what the material calls tail events. Can you behaviorally plan for a tail event? I don't think so. These are the outliers, the one-in-a-million successes, like the creation of Amazon Web Services, suddenly transforming Amazon's entire value proposition, or the success of Snow White apparently saving Disney Studios from bankruptcy back in the day. An investor needs a dose of luck just to be invested in the right market segment when those tail events happen. And furthermore, the kind of paranoia you mentioned, the kind you need for survival, it has to account for the genuinely unpredictable. There's that incredible anecdote in the material about German tanks in World War II being disabled not by enemy fire, but by field mice eating the electrical wiring. I mean, no amount of behavioral planning or careful risk analysis can rationally predict that kind of black swan event.
So when these utterly random forces can dictate whether your entire portfolio gets wiped out, how can we say behavior is the dominant driver?
It sounds like we're sort of agreeing that survival is key, but maybe disagreeing in the extent to which behavior alone can guarantee that survival. Let's maybe shift slightly then to another behavioral argument that kind of highlights this tension: the conflict between being rational versus being reasonable.
Okay.
Finance is often taught as, a purely mathematical field. The implication is that maximum returns come from cold, hard, rational optimization.
Right, the spreadsheet view.
Exactly. But the material really emphasizes that people should probably aim to be just pretty reasonable, not coldly rational. Why? Because reasonableness is more realistic, it's more sustainable for actual human beings. A classic example is paying off your mortgage early. Rationally, mathematically, you should probably invest that extra cash because market returns should, over the long run, beat your 4% mortgage interest rate.
Yeah, theoretically.
But many people choose to pay off the mortgage. Why? For emotional reasons: independence, security, maybe just sleeping better at night.
But hold on. In choosing that reasonable path, aren't you implicitly accepting a mathematically lower return? Doesn't this actually confirm my thesis? The human emotional element, the desire for comfort, is prioritized over strict mathematical maximization, which means the true scale of financial potential, the biggest possible number, is sacrificed for that emotional comfort.
Ah, I see why you draw that conclusion, but I'd actually argue it the other way. I think the reasonable approach, which is defined by things like humility, keeping the goalposts from moving, it offers its own higher return. It's just often unquantifiable. And that return is freedom and control over your own time.
How so?
Well, you're measuring wealth solely by maximizing the final dollar figure on a spreadsheet.
I'm suggesting we measure wealth by maximizing life satisfaction, independence, which is often inversely related to strict, cold rationality. The text captures this brilliantly, I thought. The highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. That unseen return of flexibility, which comes entirely from behavior specifically, saving money without a specific immediate material spending goal in mind, that's far more valuable, I'd argue, than squeezing out marginal financial gains through rigid rationality. When you choose to save, keep debt low, just for the sake of having options, you buy control over your time. And that flexibility is in fact the highest possible return, even if the balance sheet doesn't show it as the largest theoretical number. So the decision to save, then, isn't really about math. It's about controlling a different and maybe more pervasive behavioral force, our own ego.
Okay.
And I'd maintain that the ability to save, which is the key soft skill generating that flexibility we just talked about, is primarily a function of controlling that ego. The text is very clear on this point. Spending beyond a, frankly, relatively low level of basic materialism is mostly just a reflection of ego approaching income. People who achieve enduring financial success, they tend to be those who genuinely do not give a damn what others think about them. This psychological discipline, this ability to suppress what you could buy today in favor of having more options in the future, that's the most powerful tool for building wealth, precisely because it's 100% within your control, regardless of the historical context or what the market is doing.
That's a very clean sort of personal defense of the behavioral argument. But I come at it from a different angle, arguing that these decisions, they're just not made in a vacuum. Your ability to control your ego, or lack thereof, is deeply anchored to your unique life experiences and, frankly, systemic realities that can often dwarf individual willpower.
For example,
Well, consider geographical context. The material mentions, say, an Australian who hasn't seen a recession in 30 years. They're going to think about risk and saving very differently than an American who lived through the Great Depression or even just 2008. And furthermore, the modern financial landscape itself is historically novel. We are all essentially newbies when it comes to retirement planning. The 401k is only, 42 years old? This new context forces individuals to manage risk at a structural level that used to be handled by pensions and institutions.
Okay, but that just makes personal responsibility more important, doesn't it?
Maybe, but crucially, you can't talk about individual ego control without addressing the massive, culturally driven structural shifts. The material points out that between roughly 1993 and 2012, the top 1%'s income in the U.S. grew by a staggering 86.1%. Compare that to only 6.6% for the bottom 99%. That huge divergence creates sharp inequality. It shifts the whole culture away from, say, the post-World War II era, where most people's lifestyles were kind of comprehensible to their peers.
Right.
To a current reality where keeping up with the Joneses often requires taking on completely untenable levels of debt, simply because the Joneses are now financially miles ahead. It becomes incredibly difficult for individual behavior and ego suppression alone to overcome those crushing, culturally reinforced structural pressures. In many ways, the context starts dictating the behavior, not the other way around.
See, that is the critical point of disagreement. While I absolutely acknowledge the profound difficulty posed by that kind of systemic inequality, I'd argue that this external pressure makes the behavioral soft skill of suppressing ego even more critical, not less. If you rely on the system to save you, or if you just succumb to that pressure to keep up, well, you lose. The material is advocating, I think, for a financial philosophy that makes the individual resistant to those very pressures. The moment you genuinely decide you don't care about the 86.1% growth of the top 1% or what car your neighbor drives, you've successfully deployed the most powerful defense mechanism you have: control over your own personal expectations. It might be hard, incredibly hard, but it is the one controllable variable that helps ensure endurance.
So the structural problems just make behavior more important, in your view?
yes, the structural forces, the inequality, they merely emphasize why we need a better, more robust personal philosophy of wealth. The fact that the system might be stacked against the majority doesn't invalidate the behavioral tools that are necessary for personal survival within that system.
Okay.
So ultimately, my central message still holds true for me. While external risks, systemic changes, historical context, all that exists, absolutely. Focusing on behavioral soft skills, saving, patience, having room for error, controlling your ego, that is the most reliable path to achieving and maintaining financial success and, maybe more importantly, independence. These are the truly controllable variables, and they determine your long-term endurance, which, as we've kind of agreed, is the key to activating compounding in the first place. You have to survive to succeed, and survival is largely a behavioral choice.
And I would maintain that while, yes, behavioral discipline is the prerequisite for survival, we absolutely must fully respect the profound and often invisible role of luck and historical context. The sheer scale of success is often determined by factors utterly outside individual control. Think of someone like bond manager Bill Gross, whose entire career coincided almost perfectly with a generational collapse in interest rates. That's context. That's timing. Maybe luck. Financial success seems to be a really delicate balance. It requires the behavioral discipline that you rightly champion, absolutely. But it also demands a kind of intellectual humility regarding the vast, uncontrollable forces at play. You simply cannot plan for everything, and sometimes the best behavior in the world is, unfortunately, just not enough.
And perhaps the material ultimately shows that financial decisions, whether they lead to, great wealth or terrible ruin, they're always rooted in these unique, personal mental models, the emotional realities of life.
Exactly. By considering both sides, the behavioral discipline needed for survival and the structural look often required for massive scale, we get a fuller picture. It suggests there probably isn't one single right answer, just perhaps the answer that works best for a given individual's unique situation, their psychology, and their goals.
Software companies can fund their growth with accounts receivable factoring. Contact Chris at Versant Funding to learn if your software client is a factoring fit. Food processing companies can fund their growth using the cash accounts receivable factoring can provide. Contact Chris at Versant Funding to learn if your client is a factoring fit. Factoring can meet the cash needs of staffing companies looking to expand. Contact Chris at Versant Funding to learn if your staffing client is a factoring fit.